exit strategy is very important with your ease of exit, right? And your time frame. So I'll give you a real life example essentially so you can understand what we're doing in real time. So Darwin is that market that's had that negative GRC curve for quite some time, a little bit more than we would like, in that 14 years of no growth. Now Darwin's going to have, it is currently experiencing some amazing growth. So for the clients that have been buying in those areas, we've put them in areas that, 9 and 10 ERSAD scoring, which means that the local area is quite affluent and they are making really good money, and the houses are in the 600s, which means that they can afford for those houses to be well in excess of $1 million and they have the money to pay for it. Rents are $750, $800 a week on a $600 and something $1,000 house, and the years to own or affordability sits at 19 to 20 years to own, which is super low, which is exactly what it was the way Perth was pre-boom, right? So looking at that, we want to buy Darwin. We know it's popping off now and it's booming, just as we predicted and just as we bought, but that market's going up and a lot of our clients are in with entry exit timeframes around the 4-year, 5-year mark. Could even be sooner depending on how the market goes. But we are buying properties that are newer in that area as much as possible, because the newer properties are still going to be new when we exit, okay? Because some of them are 2 years old, right? For $650,000 for 2 years old, and they're the same money as the ones that are 2012 builds, right? But either way, they're that newer style 422, 450 block, 600 block, but we're trying to buy them with a bit of owner-occupier appeal. By that I mean where we can buy a pool, because especially in that climate, which is subtropical, buying a pool is advantageous. Not so much in Melbourne or Tassie, but buying a property with a pool in Darwin is advantageous. That adds to owner-occupier appeal. Also having side access. So buying a corner block or having a side access where someone can park a caravan, a boat, a jet ski, or whatever it may be on the side, and a yard for the kids to play in, and a really nice barbecue area, they're all really good owner-occupier appealing things, because it's a nice pocket where all the houses are new, it's in your estate, and the area is quite affluent, people are earning good money, but they will favour and they have the money to pay for houses that have more features and that have more owner-occupier appeal, like that, the pool and the barbecue area and the side access. So wherever we can buy those things, they will be more beneficial to us upon our exit in 4 years, when there will be no investors there. And you may be selling to a first home buyer, or you'll be selling to someone purchasing a property there, an owner-occupier, and they will think like owner-occupiers. They won't think like investors. So whilst we keep the emotion out and we don't buy things based on emotion, we're still buying something that someone will buy on emotion later, right? Because that is our exit strategy. So knowing how a property is going to sell later is very, very important. Also, changing a property from investor stock to an owner-occupier stock. This is another one that I want to touch on. So you can, I'm going to use Logan as an example, you can go buy a 600 square meter block of land in Logan, and it's got a 45-year-old house on it, and it doesn't look the best. It might be a high-set Queensland home, very, very average in condition and structure in general, but that property is a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom. It might not have downstairs built out. It's very cheap, not only looking, but quality of build, and it's very dated. That property with a good renovation and the addition of perhaps a 3-car shed with a toilet and a wet bar, that would be every Queenslander's dream first home. So you all of a sudden, a lot of Queenslanders that do have those jet skis and the boats and the second car and maybe a race car or motorbikes or whatever they have, they would love a 3-car shed. And it's a minimal addition to that property, but changes the game. And it's something that a lot of Aussie blokes love, and they could well be even a tradie, and that tradie might just be an ABN, works for himself. They might not want to pay for a big factory because it's expensive. But you know what? If they've got a 3-car shed at home, they will pay for that property and they will buy it at a premium, and you'll definitely get your money back on that shed and more. So that's another example of changing an investor type of stock to a property that now has owner-occupier appeal. Yes, it might be the tradie. Yes, it might be someone with toys or whatever, but especially having the toilet, shower, and a wet bar in a 3-car shed, that is a game changer. And it's very, very affordable. It's not expensive to do. And it's got a really, really good uplift to it. And that helps with exit strategy as well. So understand the difference between investor stock, owner-occupier stock, and your exit strategy. Timing an exit at the top of a market cycle versus holding it long-term. Now, what's better and how does it all work? Well, I've timed many a market right smack bang at the top and thought I was an absolute genius, right? And I've been doing this for a while, and I can time a market to the week, right? Because I've got my finger on the pulse and I understand how to do it. It's what I do day in, day out. But I tell you what, I've exited so many Sydney properties because I thought I was smart, and I was like, I'm gonna get out at the top of the cycle and I'm gonna go buy elsewhere and so on. And then Sydney just has another run. That's one of my biggest regrets is selling certain assets. And even though I timed the market perfectly, right, and I will still continue to do it and I have the ability to do it, I'm a little bit against it because I'd rather continue to hold the asset. I don't want to pay exit costs. I don't want to pay capital gains. I don't want to pay the agent for exiting the property and then paying to get back in the market again. So you've really got to weigh up the opportunity cost. Don't let anyone, buyer's agent, expert, real estate agent, anyone really try and get you buying, selling, because they're essentially just making money out of the transaction. I think buying good assets, holding long-term, but then also having certain assets that you buy with shorter entry exit timeframes. So now you have your Sydney portfolio, Brisbane portfolio, and so on. But you jump in and buy a Darwin, it goes up in value. You take that equity and you get out of that market, so you're not in that negative if it happens again like that for the next 14 years after this current cycle, and you put that money to work in another market. Now, that's obviously quite prudent, and if you can do that with those markets, that's fine. But in general, you should have a good asset base and should not be looking to just time the market all the time. Just buy good markets, good assets, and hold those assets as much as possible. That is my opinion. But there will be a time in not just the cycle, but in your portfolio where certain assets just don't fit or work anymore. So there's certain assets that have done their dash and they've grown in value, and now they just become burners. Because, for example, you might want to granny flat one property, like I mentioned earlier. You might want a granny flat. You might have bought 2 granny flat properties that you can do later on. When you go 5, 6, 7, 8 properties, you'll sell a couple down. You'll granny flat those because you can get an extra income out of those properties. And you might do that, and then you might sell a couple there and so on. You are selling to restructure your portfolio, and you're selling to improve, or you're selling down to buy a commercial asset that has a higher yield but less management headaches. Whatever it may be, there is a time and a place, and I think that you just need to get the right advice based on where you're going. It's important to get that advice from an expert as to when it's time to pivot and look at other assets, and that's why your portfolio review is very important. Debt recycling or equity recycling is essentially when a property goes up in value, you have equity that you can extract from that property and utilize that equity for the down payment or the deposit on your next purchase, right? And then that property goes up in value, and then you can take that equity or the debt, recycle that into the next purchase. So it's a constant recycling of equity or debt recycling so that you can get into your next property. Now you probably already know that by this point in the course, but doing that is how a lot of the best investors scale their portfolios. We are scaling based on debt. Not everyone is sitting at home going, okay, cool. I've got a 20% deposit for that. I've got a 20% deposit for that. And I've got a 20% deposit for that. No one has those deposits. We all start somewhere. And if anything, if you could take this away and you're just starting out, one of the biggest takeaways is get into the market, pay lenders mortgage insurance, and get in sooner. And if that means buying a $500,000 property with a 10% deposit of $50,000, if that gets you in the market sooner, that's what you need to do. And as that goes up in value, then you extract that equity and you buy again. But getting into the market as soon as possible is important. Everything else just compounds from there. Tax planning, we have a module in this course for tax planning, which covers, capital gains, ownership structures, and so on. It's one of those ones I can't give that advice on, but I do see different structures on a regular basis because I talk to a lot of investors every single day. That's all we do. So we get to see what a lot of the best of the best are doing. And one thing I can give you to take away is that the best of the best utilize structures. They don't just buy in their own name. They utilize structures for tax minimization purposes and for the protection of their serviceability. Because if they use structures, as you would have already learned in the finance module, the use of structures helps protect your borrowing capacity. So you can keep borrowing more and more and more and more, because a lot of people on the standard average wage, even combined wages, they tap out after a few properties and they can't buy anymore. So utilizing entity structures is very important, because the entity structures will assist you in protecting your borrowing capacity. So you can go, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 properties and you protect that borrowing capacity. So super important to do that. But that all comes down to good advice. And a lot of these property investors all have good tax accountants that all know the game and that are all involved in property investment personally. I rarely see a good property accountant who just does shares, or you're one or the other. Find an accountant who's passionate about property, who loves property, who knows property, who's a property investor themselves and works with other property investors, because they will know the tricks of the trade. There's no point going to an accountant who does crypto and shares and then telling him how you're going to scale a portfolio. He wouldn't even know the first thing about it. So make sure when you're selecting your team, you're selecting the best of the best in every area, and that includes tax planning. Now, legacy planning, long-term planning is very important. And this is why you need to go get that advice, having a good tax accountant planner to set everything up properly from the start. Now, not just legacy planning, setting up a portfolio for your kids, which I see plenty of investors doing today, but also having your borrowing capacity protected. Because a lot of investors might buy 2 or 3 or 4 and then realize they can't buy anymore. So what they do then is they transfer a property into a trust. So it's still their property. They're not selling it to anyone. They're just transferring it into a trust. And when they transfer it into a trust, they incur stamp duty. Now, stamp duty for that transfer could be 20 grand, could be 25 grand or whatever it is. That's still money that you're paying that you shouldn't be paying. So what you need to be doing is setting up your trust and entity structures properly, straight up, with a good accountant or a good planner, so that you don't have to pay that $25K to transfer assets later down the road, or you don't have to pay a whopping huge capital gains bill or tax bill that could cost you lots of money, or even 6 figures down the track. The whole point is to do this properly, treat it like a business, get the right advice to start. It's super important.